not as important. But there exists only the fourth instance-specific attribute influence. In that, I mean to say, for one particular prediction, the importance of each attribute, which is not always the same as the global attribute importance. So as an example here, you have a physician who wants to create a model which will predict if its patient has the flu or not. So he provides the the data of his patient, and the medical model tells him that there is a 65% chance that the patient has the flu. The problem with this prediction is that yes, it's a prediction of the flu, but it's not a very high likelihood of having the flu. So based on just this information alone, the physician won't be able to rely on the model's decision, and so it will just become useless. The solution here is to provide him with a single instance prediction explanation, which will tell him which attributes have been used in this prediction. As an example here, you would have the model have predicted the flu because the patient is sneezing and have an headache, but the likelihood of having the flu is still quite low because the patient does not feel fatigue. So how do you generate an explanation? Given an attribute, you can infer its influence on the prediction by comparing the result of the prediction with and without the attribute. So as an example here, you would have your data set including sneezing, and you would suppress the sneezing attribute, create a new model from it, and redo the prediction. And the difference between the two likelihood of having the flu according to the two models is the influence of sneezing on the prediction. As a result, you have this kind of prediction explanation, which can, as an example, allow a user to compare two different models based on their reasoning behind their prediction. As an example here, you have two models which predict that the patient have diabetes, but they're not relying entirely on the same parameters. So model A is mainly relying on diet and exercise, while the model B is more relying on weight than exercise, but is still relying on the diet. So now, how do we use them use these tools through framework? So first of all, you have the results of the first tool I shown you. So the user have provided the data set, and the recommender system have recommended him with a set of flows, from which he have chosen a set of workflow he wants to test. Each of these workflows is executed on the dataset, and the model explanation of the prediction is generated. From there, the user can decide if yes or no he wants to keep all of the attributes of his dataset. So you can see here that the user has performed feature engineering without any prior knowledge of machine learning. He's just deciding that as a doctor, as a physicist, because of the knowledge of his domain, and so his knowledge of his own data, he can tell that he prefers to have or not this attribute or this one based on the model explanation. So when he decides to suppress or add attributes, the execution step is repeated and the model explanation is regenerated, and so on and so forth, until he is satisfied with the final predictive model, which he will use for his further experiments. So we have created a proof of concept in order to illustrate this tool. So here you would have the user who have selected his dataset on diabetes, and the recommender system have recommended to him a set of 4 possible workflows, which would create models in order to analyze its dataset. For each workflow, the user is given a short description on how the workflow function. But let's say for the demonstration that the user have decided to test all of the recommended workflow, not being able to take a decision just with these informations. So now the user is presented the prediction explanation of each workflow on each instances. But the problem is research has shown that giving too much information to a user can overwhelm him and just do the same thing as not giving him any information. So if we gave him every prediction explanation of every single instance of his data set, the user might just decide to click next until it's over because they don't want to see everything. So the solution here is to provide him with a set of 10 selected instances, or the number can vary, but the concept here is to give him a reasonable number of instances to see. And in order to do that, we rely on the work of Strumbelge and Conon and Co. In order to select instances that will show different behavior of each workflow, in order to allow the user to see a map in a kind of way of the behavior of the workflows in different points of the dataset. So with these 10 instances, the user can see the difference between the workflows. So as you can see here, the random forest is mainly relying on the sanguine pressure and age of the patient to predict the diabetes. While the naive Bayes classifier you use predominantly the mass of the BMI of the patient. Let's say that, as an example, our user wants to delete 2 attributes as here the plasma and insulin of the patient, because the plasma and insulin are the main indicators of diabetes, and what the user here is trying to do is find the indicators not relying on a blood sample in order to predict the risk of diabetes without having to take a blood sample before. So here you have a new set of prediction explanation generated. You can see that the behavior of some of the model have changed, and the user is represented the same set of instances. And based on that, the user can compare the different behavior of the models and decide which behavior he prefers. Maybe I'm not a physician myself, but maybe a physician will tell you that the blood pressure and age is more known as an indicator of possibility of diabetes than the number of pregnancies, as an example. So it will allow him to understand how each model works in order to take its decision and decide which one he prefers. Because if you just look at the precision, F measure, and kappa that are provided just below, you can see that the performances of each model are pretty similar in many of these metrics. And maybe they won't mean anything to a non-expert user. So, but based on its own domain knowledge, it can assess the pertinence of the reflection of each model. So this is a new way to use a single prediction explanation to allow a user to analyze data. It brings an answer to some pitfalls of machine learning in order to allow a larger number of people to use it, but it still needs to be tested in a real world situation, and a prototype is being developed in order to do that. So thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation, Gabriel. It was quite interesting. Any questions? If you, for questions, just unmute your mic to ask questions. Christophe, one question?
Je pense qu'il croyait que son micro était mute, mais que du coup, là, il vient de
il
le
a mis
mute.
en...
In the confusion matrix, and 1 and 0 in the predict values, it means the check-worthy value and the not check-worthy value predict by the truth, and 1 and 0 in the true values, it means it's it labeled as check-worthy values and not check-worthy values.
So do you want us to test for the people who were not here when we started testing?
To me, this is fine. Is there someone who want to check its micro, or do you want to test your presentation or whatsoever? Okay, fine.
So we didn't test for the third paper.
Yeah, I tried to contact them by email, but I didn't get any answer.
Okay. Okay, so I will check during the session, you know, and I will chat you, Christophe, whenever they show up.
Okay, fine by me. Okay, so we're still waiting maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll start the session.
So I mean, if you want to open your camera and then you can share your screen.
Oh, can you hear me as well?
Yep.
All right, all good. So
Okay.
I'm
So
sharing
I will
screen.
introduce. Yeah. I will introduce the session. So this is a session of semantic extraction. There will be 3 papers. The first one concerning labeling companies referred in newspaper article. It is written by Elo Degen-Zygmunt, Amin Adlin, and Sylvie Calabretto, and it is Amin that will be the presentation as far as I know. So Amin, there you go.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Can you all see my screen as well?
Yep.
All good. So good morning, audience. I'm very honored to participate in this conference, which is the first one for me, actually. So today I'm going to present a rule-based approach for labeling companies referred to in newspapers articles, which was actually the first part of my master's project. So as for all source of information, economic press can be of high flows, so hence somehow processing it by hand might be difficult, if not impossible. So actually, for example, if you want to identify which company an article or companies as well an article is talking about, things might get hard. For example, actually, you'd have rarely the official legal name as registered in the States at the state to be in use when talking publicly about the company. For example, if you take this article, which is talking about Olympique Lyonnais Group, the Lyonnais football team, we'd have a hard time finding it because we're just talking about Olympique Lyonnais or Group, but never about Olympique Lyonnais Group as the way it is registered at the state. Or also, you might have in other cases that a company might be referenced as with its legal name, but also with the short version of the name. For example, here we have an example of Bourbon Corporation, which can be also referred as Bourbon only. So the objective of the project was to, given a list of a company identifiers and legal names, we should have proposed, we wanted to propose a protocol that would label French economic press articles and link them henceforth with the companies they are talking about. Before presenting my contribution, I would like to present the data set I had to deal with. So we have been given a catalog of around 30,000 companies registered in France, identified by their SIREN code, which is the unique French identifier for companies in France, and their legal names. We have also been given a data set of 120,000 articles labeled by the company they're mentioning, so referenced by the SIREN code of the companies they're talking about, and the URL link to the articles. And to process all that, to have done a scrapping that has allowed us to extract the content of 65,000 links actually. And for sure, imperfections have occurred, which has somehow biased our data. And we also have found that 10,000 articles are labeled as mentioning at least 2 companies, or if not more. So we did some cleaning to our data set. So we have been able to keep around 58,000 articles. So the cleaning filters we have applied, that the scrap text must not be blank. It must not be longer than 1 million characters for performance reasons. It must not be corrupted. So we defined a corrupted text as text containing some weird or non-printable characters or non-usable characters that we cannot read as a human. So once the clean has been done, we have indexed the corpus into an Elasticsearch engine. As for legal names, so we have just processed the removal of punctuation signs that might occur in some denominations, and we have identified that 2,357 companies to be considered as well documented, which means for us that they're linked to at least 6 articles after scrapping, because the whole work is going to be done on these companies and not the whole catalog. So now I'm going to present the contribution, which was a dictionary, the building of a dictionary of common names for companies. So instead of having only the legal name, we would build a dictionary that contained the legal name and some of all, hopefully, the usual names for companies, which might help us identify them easily in articles. So this method is rule-based, involving some statistical somehow and linguistic techniques. So the steps of the creation of dictionary, I'm going to present them very briefly, and then I'm going to detail some steps. So we have at the first time the generation of and filtering of n-grams from legal names. Then same thing for acronyms. Once we have filtered those, we would merge it for each company as a single as a set for each one. Then for each set, we would generate all the possible subsets. After that, we'd compute the F measure for each subset with querying the Elasticsearch. I'm going to give an example later. And so for each company, we shall keep the subset that maximizes the F measure as the final set of common names. And in all cases, we'd keep also the legal name wherever it has been kept or not during the previous steps. So as for the n-gram generation and filtering, so what is an n-gram? An n-gram is for us a continuous sequence of n items from a given text. For example, if we have Électricité de France, the possible n-grams would be Électricité de France or Électricité de, etc. But we'd never have. Apparently, we have lost my screen.
Yes, indeed.
Why did it stop? I don't know. Do you see it now? Sorry about that.
Yes.
All right. So, and we'd never have some non-contiguous, for example, Électricité France would not happen in our system, and etc. for other names, longer or shorter, whatever. So the first filter, it would be corpus space or text space, so it would keep only n-grams with at least 1 occurrence in concerned articles. And a second filter, it would be based on the catalog of legal names, and so have put an inverse occurrence frequency score. So which is a score that the higher it is, it means that the n-gram is rather unique and distinctive, and the lower it is, so understand that the n-gram is frequent amongst the other names and not distinctive. It would happen, for example, for common words such as banque, France, Europe, etc. And after that, we determine a threshold of the inverse occurrence frequency score to determine the n-grams to keep and those to discard. So empirically, we have decided to keep at 0.999, but I think it should be done just based on the observation of the data. As for the acronyms, so they would be made. the generation of the acronym should be made based on the first letter of the first two letters of each term. So we'll have the example later. Any French stop word or non-alphabetic symbols would be discarded before generating the acronym. So the filtering, so an acronym will be kept as relevant or potential good one if it has at least two occurrences within the corpus. We would not generate any acronym for legal names which are one word long. It would be useless. And for performance reasons, they must not be longer than 5 words. Otherwise, we'd have to add them manually if needed. So actually, in our experiment, we did need to do that. So for example, if we have la Société de distribution de papier, so we would remove the stop word. So la de would be discarded, so we'd only have Société Distribution Papier. So as possible acronyms, we might have SDP, so the first letter of each word, SODP, SODIPA, etc. So based on the first or two letters, then we'd keep the ones that would be rather relevant. Then, as I talked about the computing of the F measure, so I'm going to give an example of us doing that. So let us suppose once again for the Olympique Lyonnais group, after filtering everything, so we have got and merging the n-grams and acronyms, we have kept Olympique Lyonnais group, Olympique Lyonnais, and OL. So you'd have in front of you the all possible subsets. So monomes, I don't know if we say that in English, so one element sets, two elements, and the whole set at the end. So first of all, we query the Elasticsearch index to look at the true positives and false negatives. So we just ask it to retrieve the articles that are labeled as talking about Olympique Lyonnais group, so containing the label of the serial code of the company. Then we'd find the true positives and false positives, which are we call the retrieved results. For each subset, we'd do that. For example, if let's take the subset Olympique Lyonnais and OL, so the query should look for all articles that contain either Olympique Lyonnais or OL in the article, or both as well. In sensitive case, of course. Then finally, we would look at true positives, so articles that are labeled as talking about Olympique Lyonnais group, so containing their serial code, and that contain at least a term from our subset, so it's an end operation. So yes, once again, we look at every article retrieved in this query would contain Olympique Lyonnais or OL or both, and also be labeled as talking about this company. So given the result of these 3 queries, we'd compute the precision, recall, and F measure, and then we shall throw the F measure being the harmonic mean of the precision and recall. Then we shall repeat the same operation for each subset of common names and for each company, so for each subset of each company, and at the end we shall keep for each company the subset that maximizes the F measure, as we consider as a fair compromise between the precision and recall. And of course, as I said before, if the legal name has been discarded after this procedure, we'd add it at the end because we want to keep the official name in all cases. To present the results, so if we did the same queries with only the legal names, so we'd have a 47% of precision, 56 of recall, and 44 of F measure. For the dictionary, so it says the main results for the values of the subsets that maximize the F measure for each company. So we have had an increase for all values, 6.1% for precision, 20 for recall, and 11 for F measure. So we're aware that these results, there's an improvement, of course, but it's not a necessarily a great one, especially for precision. We're aware of that, so that's why we have some future work. So I'm also presenting some encountered issues that might explain this problem. So of course we have some scrapping problems, especially with some links that are for paid content, or some errors that we could not catch while launching the scrapping. So the data might have been biased, as I said before. We have also noticed some bad labeling in the ground truth. So this is not something we have done, it has been provided. And some companies detected what with these queries are indeed mentioned in the article, but they were omitted somehow in the manual labeling in the ground truth. We also identified several companies with common names that have nothing to do with the official names, and that we can definitely not infer them with this rule-based method. So, for example, we have Groupe Morin, which is a car seller in Nancy, which is officially registered as Méditerranée Automobile. You Love Words, which is registered as We Love Words. Thank you for this. And then we have also, for example, Olinda, which is rather known by the brand of its product rather than the company, which is Conto, which is also used as the common name for this startup. We also have identified some subsidiary problems with the labeling. So we'd have issues, for example, we've taken the example of Free and Iliad. So Free is a network mobile operator, which is a subsidiary of Iliad. So sometimes Free might be mentioned, but the article is being labeled as talking about Iliad or vice versa. And also we might have the same issue with companies that share the same common name, and especially when we have sister companies, for example, Segula Technologie Matra, Segula Engineering France, would have Segula as a common name, so determining which one to retain might be complex. I think even for humans it might be a complex issue, but we might not do the difference unless we know the company by heart somehow. And also finally we have also noticed some typographical differences between official and common names that couldn't be inferred. For example, we SNCF, which is a brand of the national train company, railway company, sorry, which is officially registered as SNCF, as you see it in capital letters. So everything is just in capital letters in France, with no dots, no punctuation. And for public communication and in their logos and everything, it's often written as we.sncf. So the our rule-based method cannot infer it. So for these problems, as for now, we see that some human manual intervention that might happen. Do you still see my screen, by the way? All right, I don't know why we're losing the screen every time. I will share it once again. Sorry about that. Can't authorize. No. Can't do this slide. That's it. So for future works, we have done the first one. So it would involve some machine learning techniques to enhance the company mentions recognition, especially, for example, the CRF, which is a supervised learning method. We'd also might be classifying also articles by lines of business. So it might be an answer. We believe, so we haven't explored it yet. An answer to the sister companies, especially if they have different lines of businesses. So we could identify of which entity we're talking about in an article. Also to enhance our dictionaries with other terms, so we establish also semantic fields linked to each company, adding some brands, some people, some characteristic terms that we'd encounter in corpuses, and of course to have less biased data. So we might get some time to improve the web scraping and also the data pre-processing to have articles of better quality. So to finish, I'd just like to show you some relevant common names that have emerged through our method, and I think I have finished with all I have to say to you. So thank you for listening, and have you got any questions? Please don't hesitate.
Thank you very much, Amin. If you want to ask some question, please unmute your micro. Okay. I'll ask a first question. Firstly, many thanks again, Amine, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I'd like to know, how do you manage the ambiguity that could appear in the inference when you're looking for example, OL could be some other company. Do you have any? How do you manage this disambiguation?
So, as I said before, this was the first part of my master's project. So in using only this method, it is somehow incomplete to recognize all company mentions. And yes, we'd have ambiguity problems, and it would bring through negatives and bias to the labeling. We have also worked on the CRF, which would also confirm that when we see OL, we'd identify that indeed the company is indeed mentioned, and also we might look if OL is repeated some many times also in the article, not only once. So
okay. So as far as I remember, there are some work that have been done using machine translation techniques in this kind of work. So maybe it could be a track to have.
This is not something I have explored, but why not? Machine translation. Okay, I take note of that. To recognize methods.
Any question?
Techniques.
Okay, maybe we will thank our speaker again, and we will move to the next one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amine.
Bye-bye.
So the next one is talking about let me find again the stuff. The event detection and time series alignment to improve stock market forecasting.
So yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can you see my screen as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So Elliot Met will do the presentation. It has been written by Elliot, Zakaria Kemli, Max Chevalier, Bernard Doucet, Jean-Philippe Guiteau, and Olivier Thiest. Go on.
Okay, so hello everyone. I will present our short paper, Event Detection and Time Series Alignment to Improve Stock Market Forecasting. So I'm Elliot Metre. I'm in the beginning of the second year of my PhD. And we work as a team of 6 people, divided in 2 sub-teams. So one from IRIT, Institut de Recherche en Informatique du Toulouse, which you probably already know, and one from Scalian, which is a consulting company specialized in supply chain management and commodities buying. So first, I will present the context of the project. So our general goal is to assist commodities buyers in the daily decision process by exploiting text data in order to estimate time series variation. So we conducted a few interviews with several experts of the domain, and what we extracted from these interviews is there is too much information to monitor for buyers. Several events are happening in the real world, and they cannot keep track of everything in real time. But these events are important because they can have a lot of impact on the commodity stocks. So different sources can be imagined to monitor these events that are happening in the real world. So news feeds are discussing it. Social networks are also discussing these events. And we think that this text data is not exploited enough in the time series variation estimation techniques. So we want to monitor these sources in order to discover breaking news, but not only. So as you may know, commodities stock market is a really specific domain. So breaking news events can have a lot of impact on them, but also some more smaller events that are not really related in the mainstream media can have huge impact. So we want to monitor different kinds of events with different granularities. So I'm going to present the general approach. Our project is basically divided in 3 main problems, which I will present separately, and then we will focus on the problem number 2, which is temporal event extraction, because it's the problem we are currently working on. So problem 1 is a time series analysis problem. So we have some time series data, namely the commodity stock market, and we want to analyze it in order to understand how they behave. There is different temporal areas in the stock. Sometimes the stock is stable, sometimes it goes up or it goes down. And so there are some breakpoints in the time series which we want to identify in order to understand what causes this variation. And we think it can be linked with several things, in particularly events. That's what leads us to the problem 2, which is temporal event extraction. So we have a lot of text documents such as news feeds or Twitter data stream, and we want to be able to detect in real time events that are happening in the real world. So we want to work with data stream, and we want to have time-stamped events. So what does it mean? We want to be able to know when the event starts and for how long it lasts, in order to make a link between the variation in the time series and this event, and we want to know for how long it will have an impact. So it's really important for us to monitor the time aspect. The problem 3 is using the data extracted from problem 1 and problem 2. So we have some time series variation, we have some events, and we want to estimate the impact an event has on the time series. So we will try to make an alignment between historical events and the historical variation of the time series. Then we want to detect in real time events that are happening in order to estimate the next variation which will happen in the time series. So we make an assumption that similar events can have similar impacts on the time series. So we will make a comparison of estimated variation with the estimation made by experts in order to be sure that we have the right analysis of the events that are happening. So now we have seen the different steps of our problem, and we will now focus on the problem 2, temporal event extraction. So first, I will do some positioning of our solution. We are interested in different techniques for this project. The first one is topic modeling, which is a really classical approach for social media analysis. It is a great method to discover topics hidden in large sets of documents. So it's working on word frequencies and document frequencies in order to understand what is discussed in a set of documents. However, it fails to exploit the semantic and syntactic information. So it's mostly a probabilistic and frequentist approach, but it doesn't really work on the meaning of the word in their context and the meaning of the sentences. So that's why we are particularly interested in neural-based approaches. So as you probably know, neural networks are one of the main reasons for the current breakthrough in NLP. They have a really strong capacity to represent words, sentences, and documents, and they have proven their quality in event detection, particularly in trigger-based approaches. However, these techniques are mostly used in a closed domain applications or in a specific set of documents, and they do not really take into account the temporal aspect of the data. That's why our approach is based on combining the representation brought by neural network while using the frequentist approach of topic modeling. So we want to exploit really the context of the document and the meaning which is inside it, and combine it with some frequentist approach in order to know when something is happening and to be able to delimitate for how long it is happening. So I will now focus on our proposition. I will start by presenting the general pipeline. So first, there are different data sources. So it can be the Twitter data stream or some news feeds. And we want to extract data from some selected sources. So what do I mean by selected sources? On Twitter, there is a lot of noise, and for event detection, it's important to do some filtering in order to have only tweets discussing interesting matters for us. Moreover, we are working on a really specific domain, the commodity stocks market. So we are interested in general events, but not only. So we will probably have to focus on dedicated sources that are dealing with this kind of topics. So we will select sources using the expertise of our buyers in order to make sure that we monitor mostly interesting information. And so we'll have a first step of filtering in order to have this information. Then we will use some deep learning models in order to embed the documents we have extracted from the data sources. We will have some documents embedding, and we make the assumption that similar documents will have a similar representation in the embedding space. So we will make some work on the data, so like data reduction and visualization. And then we will use a cluster algorithm in order to determine the different clusters. We will analyze these clusters, and we will then give them to buyers or use them for the step three I presented before. So I will focus on the cluster analysis in order to present what kind of cluster we will be working on. So we will have different types of clusters. We will have event clusters that are small cluster of high density of documents. So as I said before, a similar document should have a similar representation in the embedding space. So we think that an area with a high density of documents is composed by documents that are treating of the same topic. So they are discussing the same events actually, and we think that this area of space is depicting these events. Then we will have what we call category cluster, which is a more general groupment of events. So as an example, we can say during a weekend there will be several football games. One football game will be one event, and another football game will be another event. But these events, even if they are close, they are not the same, but they will still be related. So we think that they will be in a closed area of space, which will be the category cluster, which here represents sports, for example. So we will have different granularity of events in order to make sure to understand what is happening in a general way, but also in a more precise way in order to assist the buyers and be able to compare similar events to historical events. Then we will work on activation and deactivation of clusters. So as I said, the time aspect of the clusters is really important for us. So we think that if there is a huge density of new document in a small area of space, it means that this topic is highly discussed on social media, for example, which means that the event is probably taking place at the moment. And when the density of new document is varying and then maybe stopping, it means that the event is not discussed anymore. So it might be over, or it might have moved to another event. So we think that studying the density of new documents in a special area of the embedding space will allow us to understand what is currently happening. So these events will have different purposes. They will be used for problem 3, as I stated before, to be compared to the variation in order to estimate how they impact the stock market. They will also be given to buyers because we think it's really important to keep the experts on the loop, because they might have a different analysis for events that our model has. And so it's important to keep monitoring the impact of the event that our model will understand in order to make sure that there is no concept of that data drift, and to make sure that the prediction we are making are still relevant to the real world. So our proposition has a couple of features. We have a time-ordered approach, and it is adapted to data stream. So it's really important for us because we don't want to work in a closed domain, because we are working on real time, because variation on the stock market can be really fast. So we have to have a reactive solution. We also want to be able to label our clusters in order to allow the buyers to make their own analysis. So to do that, we can use for representative document of each cluster in order to give insights about what the events are talking about. A few difficulties arise in this project. So first, we are not really sure of how well the model will perform with unknown events. So I think it's a general problem for neural networks. It's difficult to estimate how well it will generalize to new data. So it's particularly true with data stream. The time aspect worsens the performance compared to a classical classification problem, but it is something we really need, so we don't actually have a choice. And then the current proposition use annotated data set to train on the neural network, which might not be really available for us because we are working on a particularly specific domain, which are the commodity stocks, and there are probably not leveled data about this domain. So in conclusion, we presented a general pipeline linking time series estimation and event detection in text. We presented more specifically an event detection method, which is applicable to data stream. In terms of future work, we think that using BERT, which is a language model that is currently making the state of the art of NLP prediction, of the NLP domain, as our embedding model, which will be really interesting because it has a really powerful embedding power. And we also want to explore the unsupervised approach in order to make sure that we don't rely too much on a data set, and we also want to be able to adapt to the variation of the data in case a concept drift or a data drift can happen. We want also to be able to work on specific domains such as commodities, stock market. So we will probably have to develop an unsupervised approach in the future. Also, an interesting possibility would be to make a direct link between time series and text. We are currently treating these two types of data in two separate steps, but there are a few papers that are doing this in just one step. So we think it could be interesting to dig in this direction in order to have better performance. So thank you for your attention. If you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Elliot. If someone have a question, feel free to open your micro and ask it.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Could you come? I didn't really get where how you introduce the time in your event detection. I understood that you use doc embedding and topic modeling and clustering. And where does the time come in this modeling?
Yeah, so it's I don't know in which slide I think if we are working with data stream, for example, the Twitter data stream, when we extract tweets, they have they are time stamped actually. So we know when the tweet has been posted. So that's what we will use as the time indicator of the document, and then we will try to work on the density of new documents in this area of space. So using this timestamp, we can know
if your cluster that is given after that data reduction in the bottom right corner, if the documents in a given cluster are homogeneously over a given time period are homogeneous, then they don't represent an event. They represent a subject, a topic, but it's not an event. Event is something that is something. It's an anomaly in time.
Yes. So if it's evenly distributed around the clusters, maybe there will be no real event. we think that there will be topics that are mostly discussed more than others, but we will also have to compare with its usual. I mean, the usual frequency of the topic. So we will have to work on some differences of the usage of the
There is a
discussing
paper
of the
by
topic.
Adrien Guy and Cécile Favre.
Mhm.
I put in the
Yes.
that tackles the event detection, and it is downloadable. Maybe you could take a look.
Yeah, sure. I will.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Does
Oh.
anyone have a
Yes,
question?
other questions, other details? Okay. Do you think, I have a question, do you think this can be, I would say, transform and adapt to, for example, not only the event detection, but non-entity appearance, for example, in news, when you have new names that appears. Do you think this approach is able to detect new name entities or new information that appears in news, for example, in a more general context?
I think it should work since we measure the we need to measure the density of new appearance of documents. So if there is a special kind of document that is appearing, we should be we should be able to know that it is new because it won't have the same representation as previous documents. So it should be in an area of space where the embedding space where there is not too much document. So if there is this new area which will be occupied, it should be able to know that there is something new, and then working on the document that are going in this area, we might be able to understand the new name entity or entity in general that is discussed and that has appeared.
Okay, thank you very much. Other question? Okay, let's thanks again our speaker, and let's
Thank
move
you for your attention.
Thank you, and we will move to our third article. So this one is has been written by our colleagues from Paris. Let me have a look. Which are, yes.
Yeah, Clément didn't test, so Clément,
Okay.
can you find out? Did you find out the way to share content? You are now the presenter.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so right now we have so the presentation of Clément Rofflet of an article written by Clément, Laure Soulier, Geoffrey Southern, and Patrick Gallinari about capturing entity hierarchy in data text generative model. And this article has already been accepted at ACR. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, go on.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on a Mac. I'm unfamiliar with the commands, so I'm not. But if everything works, it's great. So today I'm gonna present our work on capturing entity hierarchy in data-to-text generative models, which is a joint effort from me, Laure Soulier, Geoffrey Southern, and Patrick Gallinari from Paris 6. First, I'm gonna present the task with some examples. And then I'm going to review the current state of the art, especially the neural data-to-text models and their current limits, and then present our hierarchical model that we proposed at ESIA, and present also the experimental evaluation and some interesting perspectives. So the data to text tasks comes from 3 facts. First, knowledge and data is often modeled in a structured, such as tables or key value pairs. And second, these data are not easily usable by humans. They need to be synthesized. There have been some studies on the improvement on downstream tasks that presenting the data via text instead of raw data improve those downstream tasks. A short example of the task can be seen here with the following fake Wikipedia info box. If you want to summarize this table, we first need to select the relevant content. Then we need to order this content in the way we want to present it. And then we want to write the actual sentence. There are several also subtasks that I have not presented here, such as sentence aggregation. Here we say ESIR 2020, which is the number 3 and 4 in the same sentence, or data abstraction, for instance, Robifel et al., instead of the whole list of authors. In the real life, datasets are much more complicated, such as here in the financial sectors, where we have many different tables with many different types of entities. Cell values can be numericals, they can be literals, and more fun perhaps the sports journalism field. Here I present the game statistics of a basketball game and the short summary of this game. Formally, a dataset is comprised, an instance of a data-to-text dataset is comprised of one table, which is simply a collection of records, which are triplets with an entity, a key, and a value, and a reference text, which is the summary of the table. We can furthermore group the table by entities and have an unordered set of entities, and where each entity is itself an unordered set of records. And records now are just key value pairs. For instance, in the tables you can see below, an entity, each line is an entity, each column name will be the key of the records, and each cell value will be the value of the records. Here we can see a complete record outlined in red, where Pascal Siakam stayed 46 minutes in the game. So the current state of the art in neural models for data to text comes from neural machine translation and summarization techniques, and especially the encoder-decoder architectures with attention. On this figure, you can see a summarization standard architecture, where the source text to be summarized is first encoded in red. So each word is encoded in a vector, fixed size vector. And the decoder in yellow uses the previously decoded word and the context vector, which is simply a weighted sum of all the encoded words, to compute a distribution over the known vocabulary. The copy mechanism has been introduced quickly after this, when it was noticed that the attention distribution, so the weights used to compute the context vector, can be seen as a distribution over the input. Now the decoder can either choose to draw the next word among the vocabulary distribution, or to directly draw the word from the input using the attention distribution. This enables to deal with rare or even unknown words at test time. This mechanism can be readily adapted for the data-to-text task. For instance, consider the small table here with only 4 values. We can transpose this table into a sequence of triplets. For instance, the first cell value, Germany, belongs to line 0 and column country. So the first triplet is 0 country Germany, and so on and so forth. Now we can simply replace the source text with the source table and use the neural translation model for data to text. Just note that in translation or summarization, the source is a text. So each word has one embedding. Now the source is a sequence of triplets. So each triplet has 3 embeddings, which can be concatenated or summed, depending on your on how you feel. There are 2 trends in data to text. The first one is when people focus on encoders, such as here from Liu et al. 2 years ago. They proposed the modified LSTM, which has one gate for the values and one gate for the keys, instead of only one gate for the words. And they complement this LSTM with the modified attention, which computes one score for the values and one score for the keys. And the final attention is simply the dot product of this attention scores. On the other hand, in decoders, there have been some interesting efforts on content planning where the sequence of mentions from the table, so what to say, is dealt with separately from the fluency of the text. Here, this figure presents the work of Pudupuli et al. Last year, where they have first a content planning networks, which selects a number of records and orders them, and then another decoder, which takes the sequence of records and generates a fluent text using only those selected records. There are some limits to these approaches. The first one is the linearization of the data structure. When we represent all those records in a sequence, we lose the explicit delimitation between entities, which was explicit before in the table because we can see each entity is a different line. Furthermore, nearly everybody uses RNNs, which struggle with large inputs, and maybe worse, RNNs require that the sequence is ordered, whereas we can see in a table that if we swap two columns or swap two lines, it's the same table. And it has been shown that the order in which we present the information to RNN can impact its performance. There have been first efforts to mitigate these limits from Pudupuli et al., which present a decoder which, after each decoded word, re-encode the whole table. So this means that they have a dynamic encoding approach guided by the decoder, and they show that these approaches enables better entity representation. However, they still use RNNs and they still use a linearized sequence. This is why we propose a hierarchical model for data-to-text generation. Because it's focused on the encoding process, we use the same decoder as nearly all standard works, which is a simple LSTM, which will generate words, the sentence word by word. To model the structure in the encoder, we will follow this figure. We first want to stop the linearization of the table. So we want each line to be considered on its own. So we propose a hierarchical encoder. Furthermore, we want that line and rows could be swapped without impacting the performance. This is why we use the transformer instead of the RNNs, because transformers are known for their ability to deal with unordered sets. I will show figures later. So to first encode one entity, and each entity will be encoded independently from each other, we first need to encode each record. Each record is a key value pair. So we have embeddings for the key and embeddings for the value, which are concatenated and fed through a multi-layer perceptrons to have a unique fixed size vector for each record. Then these records are collections of records and can be encoded with the transformer encoder. The transformer encoder works quite simply. It's actually kind of complex in details, but it's simply to understand how it works. It compares everything from a set to each other. So R1 is compared to R2 until RG and has a final representation depending on these comparisons, meaning that if we swap two records so the sequence can be ordered differently, the results will be the same. To have a final representation for the entity, we add an arbitrary entity token to the collections, and we hope that the representation of this token will be a good intermediary representation for the whole entity. So this token will be compared to all other tokens and will be like a weighted sum of the other representations. Now that each entity is encoded in this way, we can extract the entity token representation and fed all of them to a second transformer encoder, the high-level encoder, which will deal with the collections of entities. We also modified the attention to work better with our structure. So the first case, which we called hierarchical KV for key value, is supposed to mimic how people write. First, we choose an entity, so we compute an alpha score over all the entity representation in green on the figure. And then, once we have chosen a person, an entity, so the highest alpha score, we choose a value from this entity. So we compute a beta score over all the records inside this entity. So the alphas sum to 1, and the betas inside one entity also sum to 1. However, we also experiment with the second case, hierarchical K, so only key, no value, where the alpha scores are unchanged, but the beta scores are computed directly on the key embedding, not after the low-level transformer, but before even the concatenation of the key and value. This is supposed to mimic how we write better. Suppose we want to say that a certain player has scored 23 points during the game. We know that we want to specify his first name and last name and say, for example, James Holden has scored 23 points. We don't care what his name is. We just know that once we will mention this person, we will say his name. So the value of the name should have no impact on the score of the key. This is why we have a second case, hierarchical K. Okay, so now how we evaluate this approach. We chose the RotoWire dataset, which is composed of basketball game statistical tables and their journalistic descriptions. So it was important for us to choose a very complex dataset to show the efficiency of our approach. And this dataset has a very large number of records, around 600, whereas other classical data-to-text dataset may have only 10 or 15 records for each table. And which was very important to us, each table has around 30 entities, whereas almost all other data-to-text datasets have only one entities, and some have 2 or 3, but very rarely. We evaluate our models with 4 automated metrics. The first one is BLEU, well known in neural machine translation, and the 3 other ones are based on information retrieval techniques. A first IR system extracts information from both the generation and the gold reference, and then we can compare the information extracted. First, we compute the relation generation, so how many information generated can be extracted from the generation that are true. Then the content selection matrix, which scores how many extracted information from our text is also in the reference text. And then the content ordering matrix, which is the number of edits we have to do to go from our sequence of information extracted to the sequence from the gold reference. We compare our approach to 5 other approaches. The first one are the Wiseman approach. It's a standard encoder-decoder with attention and copy. The encoder is an LSTM. And the flat approach, which is the same architecture, except we use transformers instead of the LSTM. We also compare our approach to two-step decoding approaches, like I presented earlier in this presentation, and to the PDPL update, which re-encodes the tables at each decoding step, which I also presented earlier. So please first note that gold descriptions trivially obtain 100% on all metrics, except on the relation generation metrics, because in the percentages, it's possible that the information extraction systems fails on average 4% of the time. So these fake information that are extracted cannot be verified. And on the count, because it's not a percentage, it's an absolute. So it's important to realize that human annotators mention on average 17 records from the table. They choose them among the 600s, not more, not less. The first thing we can see in our ablation study, the hierarchical with transformer versus the flat with transformer, is that hierarchical works much better. So the hierarchy has a big role in encoding the table. And secondly, if we compare our first approach KV to our second approach K, it's more subtle, but removing entirely the value from the decision in the scoring, in the attention scores, leads to slightly better scores, meaning that structure is very important and not so much the value. If we compare to the decoding approach, so the 2 steps decoding, we can see that capturing the structure in the encoding process is way more effective than predicting a structure in the decoder. Furthermore, if we compare to the dynamic re-encoding, it's more subtle and it's not always better or always worse. We can see that the dynamic re-encoding has better scores in factual precision, the RG precision, and in content ordering, which may be due to the fact that once a record has been mentioned, its encoding will change, leading the decoder to not mention it again or to better mention the next things on its mind, leading to better content ordering and precision. However, we can see that our hierarchical approach has better content selection, meaning that we select better the things that our decoder chooses to mention are more often the things that the journalist chose to mention also. So we have a better silency encoding. And to just finish quickly on our hierarchical attention, on the right we have a sentence that has been decoded by our hierarchical K and hierarchical KV models. And on the left, we have the attention weights during the token in red. Sorry. So we can see that the the hierarchical K without the value has very sparse attentions, whereas KV has more distributed attentions, ultimately leading to selectioning the wrong token because 31 has been messing with the decision. And the points at the first quarter are 26, and the KV chose 31, unfortunately. In conclusion, we have presented the hierarchical model to explicitly model the table structure during the encoding process. And we have evaluated this approach on RotoWire and improved the state of the art on BLEU and content selection, although not on other metrics. And the ablation studies show that the improvement is really due to the modeling of the structure and not to the transformer, although transformer helps a bit, showing that order and unordered should be taken into account in data to text. This can lead to very interesting work. First, now that we have a hierarchical attention, we can maybe constrain the weights during inference to maybe control a bit more the generation. And this hierarchical attention and the way we structure the model can maybe lead to implement operators for better inference, maybe better compare the scores to find the best player or the winning team. Thank you.
Many thanks, Clément. If you have any question, feel free to unmute your micro.
No question?
Strange. I have a question about the metrics. So you use the BLEU score. I'm quite confident with this score since I'm working on machine translation. And I'm quite surprised to see it here in a context of generation of content, and let's see some scores, such like the Rouge score, which is used in automatic generation text, for example.
Yeah, actually, I have strong feelings on n-gram metrics, such as BLEU and Rouge, and I don't like them very much. And the use of the BLEU score is for tradition. All previous models evaluated themselves with the BLEU score on these datasets, so we felt that we could not use the BLEU score. However, none of the previous approaches have used the Rouge score, and so we decided not to use it also because it is flawed maybe nearly as much as the BLEU score, and we didn't want to add a useless metrics to the field. In data to text generation, you really want to compute the fluency of the generation, but then also you really want to know how well the models say the truth, says relevant information, and this can be quite hard just comparing tokens with the generation. So that's why we really put the emphasis on the information retrieval based metrics.
Fine.
If that answers your question.
Yes. Yes. I'm don't agree with the fact that blue is a very good matrix, since it's only based on surface forms and could be also sometimes not very a very good metric. But this is another discussion. Thank you for your presentation again. Other question? Okay, so let's scan our speaker, and now I'll let Josiane close this session of the morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the attendees and speakers and the session chairs. I want to remind you that so this afternoon there will be the mentoring sessions from 2 to 4. Basically, I mean, some are just before and some are just after, but basically this is the time when it will be. And then we have the closing session at 4 p.m. So we hope to see you showing up at 4 p.m. still on the same link. Thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.